Hi folks, I'm Greg Farrar. This is my COVID-19 trends live stream. I'll be covering trends by country, by state of the United States, and by county of California, my three focus areas: the world, the United States, and California. By the way, I'm still working on making these dashboards somehow available to anybody who wants to reach them, but at this point, no such luck yet, but I have been working on that a little bit more today. That would be nice if I could just publish them, but so far I have not been successful in the different ways I've tried to do that. So for now, it's this or nothing. There's chat. If you have any requests in chat, drop a message in chat and I will attempt to keep an eye on that and to answer questions or requests for focusing on a particular country, state, or county. So starting off with the countries, United States as always in the lead in total cases, followed by Brazil and Russia. Brazil passed Russia some time ago and continues to be, I would say, problematic. I'm gonna go straight to my favorite, which is the breakdown in, actually because it is quite different now that I'm sorting different graphs differently. I maybe will take a brief step by the daily numbers graph, not adjusted for population. Brazil is, I would say by far now, the leader in daily cases. Brazil has passed the United States in daily cases, which is pretty impressive. India also fairly high, and Russia. India is looking a little bit good here. You can see the dot is just slightly underneath the trend line. That's usually a good sign, suggesting that it's slowing down. These dots are all over the place, so it's hard to make any sort of guess around there. Looking at it in terms of cases per million, my favorite number, DCPM, my favorite metric, daily cases per million, we see Qatar, which has been this wildly hot, fairly hot location for some time now. Qatar does seem to be flattening out. Our latest data point, 500, it actually has some chance of becoming a not hotspot anymore. I count 500 daily cases per million as hot. It looks like Bahrain, well, Bahrain is kind of new. We haven't talked much about Bahrain, but Bahrain is not that large, but is also hot, like Qatar. Not quite hot, but it sure is getting there. We may have a new world hotspot coming up. Chile, in general, the Central South America cluster is also pretty hot. 300 cases, daily cases per million is a pretty high number. Armenia and Oman. A lot of littler places are the hotspots of the world. When we look at something like the United States, so some of these littler places, if we were to focus in on just those over 100, we see there are quite a few countries in the world that are at least warm spots, over 100 daily cases per million. Belarus, Panama, is that a line? If so, it's so dim I can hardly see it. Brazil, Peru, Kuwait, Oman, Armenia, Chile, Bahrain, Qatar. So there, Asia was certainly the start of it. Europe was the second wave worldwide, and now we're seeing scattered waves, Central South America, but also Middle East, a little bit of Africa. Not the United States, though. If we look at the United States, not so much anyway. The United States has been dropping in daily cases per million, not dropping quite as fast now as it used to be. So it's still got a ways to go, but it just keeps hanging out around 65 daily cases per million. It's kind of lukewarm, not alarming, but that's plenty of cases in a place like the United States. So we really need to see that number drop before we can say that in any sense the United States is getting over it. But at least it's not rising exponentially. When we look just of those top 25, the 25 hottest countries in the world, many of which again are smaller countries, but there are certainly plenty of big ones in this list. When we look at just those 25, the question is, are they getting better or worse? The answer is generally worse. We see this zero line here, the thicker horizontal line, indicating which countries are growing. This is our rope chart, our growth in daily cases. And we can see that there's this really extreme case of Macedonia, which is growing by 16% every day. That's extraordinarily high growth rate. We've seen much worse, but still, we don't usually see above about 5%. And that is indeed the top of all the rest. No one else is doing much more than 5%. But South Africa is not looking so great in growth. Armenia, Sweden, which again is the country that probably least focused on a lockdown or took the mildest deliberate approach to a lockdown. Brazil also took a pretty mild approach to a lockdown, but Brazil's approach didn't seem quite as deliberate, as much as accidental. Brazil and Sweden here, pretty close to each other, still growing in about 5% daily cases. So Sweden continues to rise. It seems to be experiencing a resurgence, and at this point it's a hot spot by my definition. 5% daily new cases. The United States, on the other hand, is cool, and it's neutral anyway. It's not growing, it's not shrinking, it's just hanging in there. As all the big states, the first wave states, the second wave states, the New Yorks and the Louisianas and Illinois and Michigans have tended to get over it. New states have come in to replace them, as we'll see in the next section on states. And so we do see neither a recovery nor exponential growth from the United States. But the ones that really have a problem right now, Chile, Panama, notice the Central South America cluster there. Armenia, though, Bahrain, South Africa, Macedonia. But quite a lot of other countries are above zero. And the very best is Kuwait, interestingly. The UAE, Peru, so we're seeing some apparent recovery in Central South America, Gabon, Qatar. No, well, let me just focus on kind of the countries whose names I know. The bigger countries, we'll say. The ones that have been, another way of talking about it, are the ones that have been dominant in the news recently. This particular analysis I've been using recently, it's as though, in some sense, having all these countries who I don't hear about very much, some of the smaller countries here, is a good sign, because it means that the biggest countries no longer qualify to be in the top 25 daily cases per million. We don't see Spain here. We don't see Italy here. We certainly don't see China or South Korea here. Those long since dropped off the list. And so all that's left are these smaller countries, but there certainly are exceptions. The United States has certainly not been poster child for recovery. They started a little bit later than some, so we could say we're a second wave, and that's why the United States is taking longer to recover. But we saw a much steeper recovery curve in Italy and Spain as well. So the United States is also taking longer to recover because it itself is having waves as new states come online and new states get to this problem that didn't have it at the very beginning. So the United States, if you look at what I'll say were some of the bigger states at the beginning, the ones that we heard about at the beginning. Let's definitely throw Iran in there. Sure, Chile was a problem for a while. It's kind of a mixed bag. We have only really one bad data point here, which is Sweden, rising 5% a day. The rest are either neutral or falling, or at least if they're rising, like Brazil, if they have a positive growth, 3% in this case, the line here is falling, which means their growth rate is shrinking. So Brazil is probably headed back towards a recovery, but it certainly hasn't hit that zero line yet, which would indicate that it had turned the corner towards negative growth and towards recovery. So Brazil, not doing so great, but it could be a lot worse. It could be up at 10 or 20%. It could be rising. And so most of this, that's where we see the recovery of the second wave, we could call them maybe, the third wave countries. When we look right now at whatever we're in, the third or fourth wave, we definitely see some rising lines here. Macedonia is totally off the charts, and Sweden and Panama, and who's this? Ecuador. There are definitely some places that are accelerating in growth, and furthermore, most of the countries are growing. Whether they're accelerating their growth or not, they're above that zero line. So we still are definitely seeing that most of the hottest countries are getting hotter. But again, the counterpoint to that is most of the previously hot countries have cooled down so much they're not even on our display here. Looking at all of the countries, not just the top 25, we can get a very rough sense of which direction the world's going. This zero line is here, so just waving hands wildly, we say most countries are growing. These are all the countries of the world. Most of them are growing. Most of them are above zero. But not hugely most. We have maybe 60% growing, 40% shrinking. So the world as a whole, certainly not recovering. Like the United States, I think we're seeing more and more of these countries that didn't have it are now belatedly getting it, and they probably will get over it as the first and second waves did. We'll really know we're in good shape, though, when there are no countries above zero anymore. And if this is your favorite country, you're just very disappointed that I've never looked into Chad, for instance, I can click on anything you like here. Someday I hope to be able to allow you to click on anything you like here. 11% daily drop in Chad. Not a huge country in coronavirus cases, but for example, there are some countries doing very well, like that one. All right. I will say that the world as a whole has been consistently growing in new cases for quite a long time, as long as we've been tracking, or as we are tracking anymore. I don't go super far back, partly because my graphs just don't seem to be able to handle it. They start to fail in weird ways when I go too far back, but also because this live stream is focused on the future. Where are we going? When will this be over? And so all the things that happened back in North Korea and China times, or even in Italy and Spain times, are not so relevant to that question. But certainly it is relevant to that question that the world as a whole continues to grow 1.5% a day, and has just been doing that for a long time. So the world is not over it. It's still growing in new cases. It's not even trending downward. We're seeing a slight upward trend. The headlines delight in saying things like, "This is the most cases we've had in the world of any day ever." And that will continue to be a boring headline, I would say, as long as this happens. Of course, we're going to have more cases every day because they're growing 1.5% per day. The place where I'll be able to say something cool is when we trend downward, where I can say, it looks like in 3 days the world's going to turn a corner towards negative growth. But that's not happening. Right now the world is actually slightly accelerating, so no good news for the world there. I guess the good news for the world is we're only growing by 1.5% a day. But that's a lot. That's hundreds of percent a year. If we continue in that trend, we will be seeing a lot more cases to come. I'll skip over the deaths as I always do, because they seem to mostly follow the cases. They don't tell us anything particularly new about when this is going to be over. Population tested among the cases, the countries with the most cases: Qatar, Russia, Italy, still testing madly, Belgium. This is quite a different list than the ones we're looking at, because this really is a list of, I believe this is sorted just based on the number of current daily cases, not on the percentage, not on the hotness in percentage. So a lot of these are pretty cool countries at this point. These are countries that have cooled off quite a lot, and one of the reasons there, I think, is that they have been testing very strongly. A lot of these countries, That probably is what has cooled them down. And daily testing, similarly, I might want to switch this report over also to show just the hottest countries, because it's going to take a long time for some place as big as Italy, even dropping as it is, to have fewer daily cases than some of the upcoming very small hotspots. But you tell me, would you rather hear names you know, like France, even though France is no longer particularly relevant in the coronavirus world, or would you rather know that, let's find our graph again here, are you more interested in knowing that Panama is up and coming, or that Qatar is the hottest, or that Bolivia is up and coming? You tell me. I don't have a strong opinion on this. Among the most populous, or the states with the most cases, I will say we don't have super great testing per daily testing by population. This 0.15% number is sometimes considered a good metric, but we only see a couple of countries above that. Russia and Qatar. Where's the United States in here? There's something a little weird here, because I thought, yeah, okay, the data just isn't accurate for the United States. The United States is, I believe, doing better than 0.15 as a whole, but this particular data source, our world of data, it's not collecting data from the United States on percent tested. I may stop showing this graph. Okay, so the world is warming up, still warming up. No great news on the world. There have been times when it seemed like the world was cooling down, but then it started to come back as Central South America has heated up, as the United States, which has more cases than just about anyone, has not cooled down. Let's look at the United States specifically in our rope chart, if I haven't already done that. The United States really does dominate in total cases, even if Brazil is passing it in daily cases. But either way, Brazil and the United States both still slightly hot, or not I wouldn't say hot. Hot is 5%. Brazil has had some days in that range. The United States about at zero growth, so it's not shrinking. Brazil is definitely not shrinking at 3%, or as we see here, some days have been, each of these days is an average of a week. So the week preceding this had an average 7% growth. That's quite high. Average 5% growth, quite high. So with those big contributors to the world not shrinking, the world as a whole is not shrinking, and it's really probably mostly those two. Let's see in the total cases. Could be a little bit of, let's look at India and Russia as well. The rest is kind of noise. We even have India here. We won't have India here. Russia's here though, also stable, maybe starting to heat up just a tiny bit, but not very hot. And so these two together hold the world near zero, but then Brazil pulls it up and we see that 1.5% daily growth. It's probably mostly contribution of just those three countries. If those cool down, then we'll start to see the other countries having more of an impact on which direction the world is going. Eventually, if they start to cool down, then if the United States really starts to cool down, then the world will start to cool down. If Brazil starts to cool down, the world will start to cool down, and it'll be like that for weeks until they get so cold that the other countries start to the smaller countries we're seeing as the hottest ones start to have an impact on the total growth rate. Okay, moving on to the states of the United States. In total numbers, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, I'm guessing we will never see anyone beat New York. But New Jersey could be, it's a target for sure. California could pass New Jersey if things go just a certain way. Illinois, its points are below the trend line. Illinois is slowing down, same with Massachusetts. So neither of these seem super likely to be beating New Jersey. Anyway, in terms of where we're going, neither those numbers nor these numbers, which by the way California and Texas are the leaders right now in total numbers, but when you look at it per capita, neither of them are huge players because they're both so big. Even though they're total, the fact that they're leaders in total numbers is just another way of saying that the real leaders have dropped out of the race. All those northeastern states, Rhode Island, New York even. Is New York even on our graph anymore? Yeah, no, it isn't. The answer is no. New York, New Jersey, not even on our graph anymore. Rhode Island, which I think was first 2 days ago, the very first, is now 23rd. It is disappearing very quickly. It had some exceptional day about 7 days ago, and now that that day is gone, Rhode Island is disappearing. So we see the big players from weeks ago are just gone, and that's what allows something like Texas to be in second place, or California to be in first place in total, in new daily cases, the total number, not adjusted for population. But when we adjust for population, there's nothing hot here. Hot is 500. We don't have anything like 500 anymore. But we do have a lot of warm, or a lot of lukewarm. We don't actually have that much warm. I've been saying warm is over 100. The only warm states right now are Maryland, which is dropping. You can see Nebraska, which is dropping. Virginia, which is sort of flat, and Minnesota, which is sort of flat. And I guess maybe just barely Arkansas, which seems to have a nice, or not so nice, sharp upward turn to it. Arkansas just barely is qualified as a warm spot. And then we have all these other ones, including this cluster of upward trending ones with, Arkansas is actually part of that cluster, Arizona, North Carolina, and someone I can't quite grab here, Alabama. So those are the next generation's warm spots, I guess. Fifth wave or something. I mean, don't know when to draw lines between waves. But we can see Illinois, which certainly was a warm spot, maybe even a hot spot almost, has dropped out of being warm. It's down to 80 and it's dropping quickly. Illinois, from the second-ish wave, is definitely recovering. It's got a very nice downward slope. And as with the world, we're starting to see the smaller states, the less populous states in some cases, definitely the less populous states, the smaller states are now getting this third or fourth or whatever wave it is, and are becoming warm, but they're small, they're not even warm. There's really nothing to be alarmed by in this graph. We're always going to have all the states, some states on the graph, because regardless of how small it gets, we will see some leaders, but the leaders are becoming less and less impressive or depressive, as the case may be, with almost nothing above 100, and certainly nothing shooting way up into the many hundreds. We don't have anything like Rhode Island, which was, or New York. We got nothing serious here. So the news is generally good, but we still do see trends upwards here that maybe, if things go just so terribly, may become 100, 200, 300. But for the most part, nothing to worry about among the states that I can see. Doesn't mean they're all getting better, though. And this is the graph that shows who's getting better and who's getting worse. It's certainly, there should come a time when all of these lines are below zero and maybe pointing downward, except for the odd brief hot spot. We're not there yet, but even among the hottest ones, the trend is good. We see a sort of a sparseness of these lines above zero, and more of a packedness of the lines below zero. Above zero, what do we got there? 10 at most. 10 of the top 25 are growing, and the ones near zero are pretty much horizontal. So the only remotely problem spots are Arizona, and these are hot. These are hot by my definition, more above 5% growth. Arizona, Arkansas, Utah, and South Carolina. So we do have some new hot spots, but and they're just barely hot enough to be on our top 25 in daily cases per million, hot in the other sense, and how many cases they actually have right now every day, and they're growing. Let's do a sort of reverse analysis here and say, what if we look at just Arizona, South Carolina, Utah, and Arkansas? Arizona, South Carolina, Utah, and Arkansas. These are the ones that are growing fastest. These are our hot spots. Now, actually, what I wanted to do is look at them above. Arizona, Utah, South Carolina, and Arkansas. The question is, are they, well, first of all, are they hot spots? No, they're not in terms of daily cases. They're hot spots in terms of growth. They're growth hot spots because they're growing 5% a day. But it doesn't matter if they're growing 5% a day very much if they have very few cases. Do they have very few cases? No, they don't have very few cases. They're not like India with 9 daily cases per million. They have a reasonable number of cases, a fairly high number of cases, but not even quite up to the level of being warm. Are they rising? Yes, and are they warm? Well, they're lukewarm. So these are probably the worst states right now in the country. These are states that have a few black spots against them. They're lukewarm, 50 to 100. You can see these graphs are rising, and you can tell that that's because they're above zero, but they're also accelerating. And so these are the states that right now are the problem. I'm not super worried. I wouldn't say don't visit Utah. These aren't hot, they're not even warm, or just barely. There's just not much bad news to be found among the states of the United States right now. Let's look at California. That's the worst news we can find. I'm not too worried. Looking at California, it kind of fits actually with the category of the things we were just looking at. It's not great in California. It's lukewarm, 68. It's rising here, so it could possibly eventually become warm in a week or two if that trend continues. And at this point, it's got a 2% growth rate, but at least it's not accelerating. The growth rate is flat. So California it's meh. It's not recovering. It's not accelerating off into the stratosphere. It's not hot in any sense. It's not growth hot. It's not daily cases hot. California's meh. Lukewarm and sort of lukewarm in growth as well. Warm in growth. Technically, I say that something above 0.1 or above 1% is a growth warm spot. So California is a growth warm spot. News isn't great for California, but I'm not moving out of state yet. Based on that analysis, it seems like it's very plausible that things will get better. But we do have to drop below zero before we can say that we're actually recovering. And at this point, still around 2% growth. If we look at all the states, here's that zero line. The United States as a whole, I'd say about half of the states are growing and half of them are shrinking. So the United States is maybe more than half, and we definitely have a lot of states that are accelerating. They're growing and accelerating. The very worst state is Arizona. The very best one is Michigan. Those are both accelerating in opposite direction. But nobody's 10%. We have a fair number of 5s up here, hot spots, and a fair number of cold spots, places that are really cooling well: Delaware, Minnesota, Kansas, New Hampshire, New Jersey. Let's look at New York just for kicks, because New York will be on this one, because this is all the states. Yeah, New York is at 3% and dropping. Not dropping, 3% stable, which is fine. You lose 3% of your cases every day, you will fairly quickly recover if they can just hold that. There is a little bit of an upward tilt there, so maybe they're going somewhere unfortunate, but I wouldn't count on it. New York seems to be doing great. Total percentage tested, I almost don't need to say anything about this. All the states are testing more than 3%. That's good. Some are doing even better. Ooh, now this is interesting because my graph was wrong before. So, and the new, actually this isn't the one that's wrong, or is it? I think this isn't the one that's wrong. I'll get into that. My next graph was wrong and I fixed it. Percent tested per day among all the states. I'm not going to go into which are which, but we can just say that here at this 0.15 line, that's a very good number if you can exceed it in percent population tested per day. A lot of states are doing that. Probably even more aren't. Everyone's above 0.05% a day, so that's something. At least no one's doing terribly, but it's good to be above that number. New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, New Mexico, some of the first wave states, I think, really turned up their testing when they saw they were in trouble, and they all tested their way out of it. They tested and locked their way out of it, probably. There are a lot of reports, a lot of analyses going around about how well lockdowns worked. Would we have had 60 million cases by now, or was it 6, whatever? Huge number of cases. One of the reports guesses if we hadn't locked down. I find these things dubious. I don't know how we could possibly know that. They're doing some sort of an economics analysis, but it's plausible that lockdowns helped, and certainly what we can say is New York got better, and New York locked down, and New York tested madly. Is that causal? Plausibly? You look at this ex-New York Times Alex, whatever his name is, a reporter who just thinks this lockdowns are stupid and have always been stupid. I think he has a plausible position as well, but no one really wants to test that position. We don't have much data. We saw Sweden in the last case, where Sweden didn't lock down much, but still pretty severely. They still locked down pretty severely, just not as hard as some. And we do see they're not doing as well as some. So I don't know. I think that in the end, the analysis, trying to do an analysis now based on some economics model, probably doesn't tell us how well lockdowns work. Maybe eventually we'll be able to do something like a comparative analysis of who, when, did what, and what were their actual graphs like, to get a sense of how much lockdown worked and how much testing worked. But especially with the latest data from the World Health Organization, very good news. I saw something about how they're clarifying that now, so maybe I'm a day behind in my news, but very good news from the World Health Organization saying that asymptomatic people typically don't transmit the disease. They had, for instance, the chain of transmission from, I think, the very first case in Germany. They followed it, and they've pretty much followed it all the way to the end of its tree, who infected whom, and they said it was very unusual to see that one of those infections jumped from an asymptomatic person and then infected someone else. So that suggests that contact tracing and testing will actually solve this. We don't need to worry that there's massive underground infection happening from people who don't even know they have it. People who have flu-like symptoms at this point, I think if they've got, well, I won't say if they've got any sense, but many of them will get tested. And if they get tested, then they'll know they have it. And if they didn't have symptoms and didn't get tested, we can speculate that they're not going to transmit it to anyone, even if they actually have the disease, which is kind of awesome. So this kind of extensive testing, I think, we now can say with more certainty, based on actual data like that transmission chain in Germany, we can say testing really will stop this. Testing and contact tracing really will stop this. Whether the lockdown is effective, I think, is less certain, but it seems like a good idea to me. All right, this is the graph that was terribly wrong before, and the reason it was terribly wrong is I'll give you the history of how I found out it was terribly wrong. Governor Cuomo of New York reported yesterday that they had a positive test rate of something like 1.5%, and I heard this and said, that's not what I've been saying, because I've been saying that New Jersey had 40%, and New York, I think, had 20% and dropping. Everyone's dropping, but I think I was reporting as recently as a couple days ago that New York was testing 20% positive. So I went back to see whether Cuomo was wrong or whether I was, and to my disappointment, Cuomo was right. What was happening was actually, I shouldn't say disappointment, because I'm very happy New York has a 1.5% testing, and a lot of other states are testing much lower than I thought. The data source I had, covidtracking.com, has a column called positives, a number that's like positive tests, and a number that I forget, but whatever, the positive tests turns out is an aggregate number. I'm accustomed in these data sets of having positive tests be the daily tests. They have a line for every day, and every day they say positive tests, 1,000, positive tests, 2,000. And so I was taking that as a number of positive tests that day, but actually it's an aggregate of all days up till then. And so when I was saying that New York was testing 20% positive, what I was really saying, the graph was meaningful, but it wasn't what I thought it meant. It meant that of all the tests ever done, New York had tested 20% positive. But the real question for, in terms of, I think a more relevant question is how many tests each day are positive. And so there's this different number that New York reports, or that COVIDtracking.com reports, which is what do they call it? Positive test increase. I don't know that I fully approve of their labeling of columns, but that is the actual number that I would call daily tests or positive tests. And when you look at that, we see that other than these, which may be incorrect data because they're so much higher than everyone else, but maybe not, maybe Maine and Oklahoma really are testing very high right now. Everyone's under 20. In fact, most are under, I think everyone's under 10. And 10, you may recall, if you're one of my loyalist listeners, 10 is the number that California, or some originally said was, this is the threshold under which we're doing well. If less than 10% of our cases are coming back positive, we're doing well. So almost all states, there are a couple here, Arizona, Virginia, that maybe aren't quite there, but 50 states all testing less than 10% positive. And New York is testing 1.2. Actually a little lower than what Cuomo was reporting, but I think he was reporting it 2 days ago. So New York is doing great. Great, I say. Everyone's doing great in testing. We are finding fewer and fewer new cases. And one of the things that I love about this number is it surely is an upper bound on the percentage of the population that is infected. We couldn't possibly be testing 1.2% positive among the people in New York who get tested, and still have more than that in the total population be positive. Or put another way, if we randomly tested the whole population of New York, it would surely be less than that, because the ones who get tested are ones who are more likely to be positive because they have symptoms often. And that's less and less true. I think we're testing more and more people who are just like, I think I'll be tested. By the way, I got tested. By the way, I'm negative. And I just was able to walk in and for free get tested at a place near my house. And I think a lot of people like me have gone in, gotten their brain tickled, and found out that they were negative and had no real reason to believe that they were positive. Now, I have been traveling through some airports lately, frequently, and so there was some cause to imagine I might be more susceptible to being positive than anyone else, but I'm asymptomatic, and at least according to the one test, there are such things as false negatives, but according to this one test, I am negative. It wasn't an antibody test, so maybe I had it 5 weeks ago and didn't know about it, but according to the latest World Health Organization numbers, if I did, I probably didn't transmit it to anyone else. So New York's doing great. Less than 1% of their population currently infected, surely, and probably much, much lower. Let's look at a few others. We can put an upper bound also on how many could be infected in California. Probably, surely less than 3% currently infected in California. That number's not dropping quite as fast as some. California continues to come back with 3%, 5% positive of all the people tested. But again, people who go to get tested tend to be people who think they might be positive. Louisiana, I mean, I don't really even need to show you all these because everyone is below 10 and almost everyone's below 8, which is California's threshold to open a county. So everyone's doing great. Good job. Georgia, maybe not quite so well. Where's Colorado? My other home. What order is this thing in anyway? Some strange ordering. Colorado is heading sharply downward, still a little high at 4%, but I mean 8% is the threshold where you say you're doing great. And Colorado is sharply seeing fewer and fewer every day. So this suggests that Colorado probably still has a little bit of a problem for the number to be dropping. but they're getting over it. These ones that are a little flatter, it kind of suggests to me that their problem might not be as bad. And there has been suggestion that Colorado had it worse than California. At this point, I think California might be, of the two homes that I live in on a alternating every week basis, I'm more worried about catching it in California at this point, actually. Colorado is it seems to be doing better. All right, so those are the states. Moving on, speaking of California, and again, with states, the summary is things are looking pretty good. I sure would like to see our growth rate drop, but a lot of the big problem states have totally gotten over this, and like a 90% over it. And what I feel like we're seeing now are the stragglers, the smaller states, the middle of the country states, non-coastal states, the red states, catching up and getting the virus, and they'll get over it just like everyone else has with testing, contact tracing, and lockdowns. And even as they lift lockdowns, I think they're going to get over it with testing and contact tracing. So, counties of California. Los Angeles still not looking great, still outpacing its trend line, still way ahead of everybody else in total cases. In terms of daily cases, Los Angeles still not looking great, still way ahead of everybody in daily cases. If you look at it in terms of population, though, we have these two crazy counties, Imperial and Kings. Imperial at 600 DCPM is a hotspot, officially. By my own definition, a hotspot has been for a while, and it has these really high recent data points. Kings as well, Kings County. I haven't looked into that as much about why Kings is so high, but Kings is a warm spot at least at 250. Neither of these are huge counties, but they are the hottest in the state. They're not driving the state numbers, though, because Los Angeles is driving the state numbers. It completely dominates everything in the two graphs above. And so the real question when we look at why is California rising is why is Los Angeles rising? Los Angeles is warm. Wasn't for a while. It was rising but not warm. Now at 130, it's still warm. In some of the recent days, 140s, Los Angeles is warm. We have a warm spot in terms of daily cases per million, and for something as big as Los Angeles, that is a lot of cases. If you're warm, DCPM warm, and you're Los Angeles, you have a lot of cases. And specifically, you have 1,000 cases a day. It's a lot of cases. And it's obviously not flattening out here. It seems to be rising. We'll see a little bit more in the rope chart whether that's true. The counties that are close to being warm are Kern, Marin, San Bernardino. Let me zoom in again, make sure if yeah, that is them. Kern, Marin, San Bernardino. No one else. No one else is really troublesome here. California has well, it does have hotspots. It has Imperial. It has no big hotspots, no very populous hotspots. Los Angeles is certainly most of the news for California. All the other counties other than those three are below 50. They're not even really lukewarm. They're doing fine. They have a lot of, we have a lot of cases, and they're not super quick recovering, but they're not even warm, not hot. There's not a lot of bad news for California right now. If we look at the hottest of the counties, the warmest of the counties, we can see, is Imperial also the fastest growing? No, it's not. How is Imperial doing? Imperial has turned the corner and is shrinking. So our hottest county has turned the corner towards negative growth and is now recovering, it appears. That's good news. Monterey and San Joaquin are some of our most troubling counties. Now, let's look at them on this graph just so we can get a little bit of context. Monterey, I'm going to look up the population of San Joaquin. I can spell it. Monterey, I think, is at about 150,000. San Joaquin is 760,000. It's not, Los Angeles is 10 million, I think. So San Joaquin is not competitive with Los Angeles. Then who is? but it's a lot bigger than some of the really small counties. Oh yeah, no, I'm completely wrong. Monterey is 400,000. Monterey is a pretty big county too, pretty big. Let's look at Monterey and San Joaquin on this graph. So again, 100 is warm. Monterey is, I'd say they're pushing to lukewarm. San Joaquin isn't. San Joaquin is at 20. It's really, there's nothing to worry about in San Joaquin right now, except that the growth rate is so extremely high. But it'll take a long time, even at 10% a day. It'll take a while, weeks, before this becomes warm even. So something to worry about a little bit, and same with Stanislaus, I guess. But again, no one has that many cases when considered by population compared to other spots that have really had it bad. But these are our among the relatively good news that is California, except for Los Angeles, which is mediocre news. These are the worst in terms of growth. Madera, it's probably not even worth looking at much. It's not going to be a big deal. Yeah, also very few cases and not that large, I think. I'll just look it up just to be sure. Madera County, 150,000, another 150,000 county. So relatively small. Noise compared to Los Angeles. But what is Los Angeles itself doing? That is the one that matters in terms of the state numbers, and predictably what Los Angeles is doing is exactly what the state's doing, because all the other counties don't matter in terms of the state numbers because Los Angeles is so big. Los Angeles, therefore, looks exactly like the state. Is this not exactly the graph we had for California? Let us look. California rope chart, see 1.9%. And here we have 1.6%. So all the other counties are adding to the numbers of California, but they're only adding 1/3% of daily growth. Mostly California goes as Los Angeles goes, and Los Angeles is not going that well. Los Angeles is growing 1.6% a day, and it has been for a long time. So Los Angeles is not recovering. Los Angeles is not exponentially growing. There was a moment there where it was shooting up in a way that looked like it could get really terrible, but that was just sort of a blip apparently in the data. Its numbers, sometimes it shrinks. It had a whole week here where it was an average of 4% reduction of new cases. So Los Angeles is not recovering in terms of growth. It's not even trending downwards towards recovery. It's just holding steady at this 1.6%, which is a fairly low growth rate. So I imagine, because what we've seen typically in cases like this is everything turns downward eventually in a matter of weeks. I imagine that in a matter of weeks, we're going to see this thing turn downward. It will be horizontal, and then a week later, Los Angeles will turn the corner towards negative growth. That's my guess, just because nothing ever grows into hot range anymore. But if things go really badly, sure, Los Angeles could get warm or hot or become the world leader in new cases. I see no reason to expect that just from experience. Looking at all the counties together, they look kind of bad, really bad actually, in terms of growth. We certainly would rather not see this with the zero line here. All the counties pretty much are growing, other than Humboldt, which randomly is doing extraordinarily well. The very best we have is 1.6% growth per day. All the counties of California are growing, and many of them seem to be accelerating. So since they're all way smaller than Los Angeles, we don't see the state as a whole accelerating, but that's just because Los Angeles is dominating them. But there are a lot of slightly downward lines here, but indicating that some of these are turning towards recovery. But we do see a whole lot of counties that are just, this is not a good graph. They're all growing and they're all accelerating. This is the line for hotspots here. Hotspots in growth, more than 5% daily growth, include San Francisco, Contra Costa, Sacramento, Stanislaus, Monterey, Placer, Madera, San Joaquin. So San Francisco as well, for instance, is showing that San Francisco? There's a dot for San Francisco there, but it's general trend line. I was just picking up its most recent day. San Francisco as a whole, I don't think is doing as poorly as that. Yeah, San Francisco is doing okay. It's kind of flat, but it's had some big days recently, so maybe San Francisco is coming back to some sort of a growth spike. It's not a spike. The news likes to call things spikes, but this is not a spike. A spike is what Spain and Italy did. We're seeing nothing that bad at this point. Just for kicks, let's look at some of the Bay Area counties. Where are they headed? There are so many of them, I'm not going to be able to pick them all out quickly, I don't think. I'll just pick a few then. There's at least one or two I'm missing there, but Santa Cruz, I know that some people care about here on this call. Santa Cruz is doing all right. It's slightly trending upward in its growth. Its growth is slightly positive, 0.5% growth per day. Santa Cruz is not clearly recovering, but it's one of the best counties right now, and it still has just very few cases. But its neighbor, Monterey, again, is one of the worst counties right now. Monterey with a 10% growth rate, and Monterey with reaching towards lukewarm in temperature. So the trends, the direction of California is a bad direction, but the place it's at right now is not a bad place. So what we hope happens is, from this relatively benign state of its infection, that it goes in a bad direction, because we know it's going to, it already is, but not long enough to really get into a serious situation and then turns away. I can't say that's going to happen. This data does not say that's going to happen, but my experience of seeing a lot of other places do this sort of a curve is that's what has always happened. Other than those few very early hotspots, and I would say before testing came online, those few very early hotspots, no one ever gets hot anymore. So I don't think California will. There will be a fight. There's going to be a lot of work to get under control, a lot of effort, a lot of testing, and if people completely lose their will to quarantine and isolate, then we'll see pressure upwards. But even then, I don't think we're ever going to see California become an Italy. That's just a guess, though. I'm not reading that from the data, just from, or I guess I sort of am. I'm reading it from past graphs and my memory of the past graphs that we presented here over the past few weeks. Population tested by county. All the counties are doing great. 2.6 is the worst. San Francisco at 9% total tested. Counties are doing very well in testing. This, again, is why we're not going to see a runaway epidemic in California, is because all the counties are testing well. Population tested by county. Just a couple, Los Angeles, Marin, and San Francisco and Kings, 4 of them are doing a really good job in daily testing. Others are trending that way, except for some reason Riverside seems to be losing it. But yeah, the counties are doing well in testing. So that's the news. I'll work backwards in my summary. The California is in a mediocre place. It obviously has a lot of the virus, but it's lukewarm. California is lukewarm. It's not a warm spot. It's not a hot spot. It's lukewarm. But a lot of its counties are trending in a very troubling direction. If that continues, we could be in a world of trouble here in California. My guess is it won't, but we will watch and I will tell you. At the state level, it's, I think, better, as I recall. Now I don't even remember. Yeah, well, of course, all the big states have gotten over it. All the ones that really had it bad have gotten over it. We have daily cases per million. We have nothing that's hot. We have little that's warm, a few, very little that's warm, and we have trends that are heading kind of neutrally. Some are up, some are down. But again, there are no really bad places here. There are no hot spots. There are a few growth hot spots, but since there are no existing daily cases hotspots, the states, I would say, are doing okay. Not recovering, but holding steady, and hopefully testing will eventually push things down towards recovery. And at the world level, I'll just show that growth chart, if I can find it, a really big one. The world is also kind of neutral. You can see that ultra busy chart that says, well, maybe more countries are also rising than are falling. So kind of like the counties and kind of like the states, there's this sense that we have a little bit of a trend in the wrong direction towards more growth. But the good news remains at this level as well, that there are few hot spots, only one. There are few warm spots. And so, yes, there's a lot of growth, but it's mostly coming from countries that don't have it very bad anyway. And so if those curves trend as other curves have trended, we will never see another serious growth hotspot in the country, in any country, in any state, in any county. I'm not making that prediction, but I'm saying that the past graphs have gone that way, and so I'm not alarmed. I wouldn't be worried to go anywhere in the world at this point. I wouldn't feel like I was in grave danger from coronavirus in any of the places we've talked about. That's the news today. Thanks for watching. I'm Greg Farrar.